thinking is really, really important. I want to talk about three specific things in regard to thinking, and that is blind spots, distinctions, and perspectives. And feel free to jot down a note or two. I'd encourage you to take notes on anything that you think is really relevant, because at the end, we want to ask you to commit to taking some action based on some of the things that you learned, observed, or heard. Blind spots are what you don't see, and I think you had mentioned that, so there's a whole deal on awareness. Distinctions are looking at what we do day in and day out differently. And then the whole perspective deal. Sometimes we really look at the perspective of us versus are we really looking at the perspective of the person that's calling. And that person that's calling could be our user, or they could be a coordinator, right? It's not always the person that's talking to us is really the user. Matter of fact, a lot of times it's not. It's a coordinator, an assistant of some type. Agree? So we want to be able to really get into the perspective thinking here. So let's walk through this for a minute. Here we go. Here's a model in the book we talk about called the belief window. On the left side is any of us in here. On the right side of the world. In this model, there's a window. And between us and the world is this window of the way that we filter life. And the red dots represent principles. Where do we get our principles? Primarily from our
Parents.
Exactly, from our upbringing, our parents, right? And as we move through life, where else do we get our principles?
Education.
Right? Thank you. Education. Where else?
Interaction with others.
Interaction with the people around us. Where else?
Work experience.
All the people we work with. Where else?
Religion.
TV.
TV, exactly, right? Things we read, training we go to, right? And so all of us in here are doing life the very best we can, including how we do our business, based on the principles in our window. Agree with that?
Right.
Sometimes our principles are outdated or inaccurate. And we can just keep working harder and harder and harder, but we have an outdated principle. For example, in 1996, a guy came up to me in my office in Detroit and said, "Tony, we're going to start doing email." And I said, "No, Gifford, we do faxes." I said, "Man, we spent 3 years, we got the system down, we perfected it, you know, we've invested a lot in this whole fax system. We're going to do faxes." What's email, by the way? And so I was so blinded, I had a blind spot in technology. And I'm guessing some of you have gone through that same thing in the technology mode, where you've been resistant a little bit, and then all of a sudden you go, wow, there's an easier, better way to do something. Agree?
Yes.
So I'm asking you as we go through this experience this afternoon to not just think about technology, but think about, is there things that you're not seeing that could be a blind spot where you go, aha, that's an easier, that's a better, that's a more effective way, right? I shared the experience last week that I was reading about the whole idea about when I was raised, my parents, a principle they gave me was to always clean your plate.
Yes.
I don't believe that's the right principle,
Sure.
because you could overeat.
Yes.
Right? So what I believe you should do is eat until you're full. Change and shift, right? But what did my parents teach me? They love me, they just taught me a principle that I believe is inaccurate. I believe many of us have principles that are inaccurate, not just personally but professionally. So utilize this time today to really think about if there's things that you want to tweak. Okay? And guess what? You may not agree with everything that I say, and I'm okay with that. Because guess what? Next week I may adjust and go, wow, that's a better way. But trust me, I do study a lot. I really, really do. I read more than almost anybody that I know of. I mean, I read and read and read and read. I meet people, I absorb, and I make it really my business to be able to serve up the very best practices. Okay? All right, next one. How about this one? The FedEx truck. We see the FedEx about 5 different ways, the logo. We see it on a truck, on an airplane, on a box. We see it on the internet, or we see it in on the actual package that we get itself. This logo has been out for over 20 years. It was presented to a Getting Leader presented to Fred Smith based on my research back in the early 90s. When we see that logo, we see it often, right? Most people don't see the arrow in the logo unless it's been pointed out to them. How many of you do not see the arrow in the logo? Raise your hand. One person?
I do
2
now.
people? 3 people?
I do
4
now.
people?
The what?
How many don't see the arrow?
The E and the S. I just
Don't see
noticed
the arrow.
The E and the X.
Oh, I
Yes.
didn't
Oh,
see
it
it.
is.
No,
Okay,
and
so
that's
I'm gonna go ahead
up.
and raise my hand.
Because it's negative
I would
six.
see
Yeah,
it.
I never even saw
Very
it.
cool.
Right? So here is a takeaway. When you're thinking of and seeing the FedEx truck or the FedEx logo in the future, I'd like you to think about this training. And I'd like you to think about this arrow that's in that logo and think back and say, wow, there's something that maybe I didn't see. And am I really seeing the very best I could be in terms of the way that I'm doing business? All right, how about this next one here? When we see the dollar bills, all of us want more of them. We want them in our pockets, right?
Oh, yeah.
Dollar bills have been around for a long time, agree?
Yes.
So much that sometimes we don't even realize all the things that are on the dollar bill. Agree?
Yeah.
Just like many of us have been in and around this business for a long time, we don't even realize a lot of the distinctions because we just get so used to it, right? All right, so we need to make sure that we're looking at distinctions. And then the last one is this. Do you see a horse's head or do you see a mountain?
Both.
Well,
I see
yeah.
both.
Eventually you see both, right, Randy?
Yeah.
Right, so what the point here is that we want to think about perspectives, not just our perspective, but how is that person seeing it? How's Eric seeing it? How's Kelly seeing it? How's a colleague seeing it? How's the driver seeing it? How's the mechanic seeing it? Right, we got all these different perspectives going on, and we got to be careful to not just be limited from our lens, right? What's on our window, but what's the perspective of anybody we're communicating with? So whether it's a team member, a prospect, or a person that's coordinating for a prospect, right? Okay, so what's the takeaway? Thinking smart matters, right? We've got to think smart, not just work harder, not just polish the way that we use words, not just type better, but we got to think better.